We just got a massive ban list in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so let's go over some of the best decks right now after a bunch of stuff has shifted. If you still need a beautiful playmat or deck box, you can go to zerodamagegaming.com and use the code SOLEMN for a discount. So right here, this is gonna be basically for this weird in-between format. There's a couple major European events like German Open and so forth in Europe, and a bunch of regionals as well, of course. However, YCS Vegas will already have a new set, and so that's not gonna be included. So this is basically going to be like January and the first half of February. So first of all, Ref Synchron, just assume this is like, you know, whatever weird Synchron pile. This is usually just going to be a rogue deck, crazy when it goes first, can't go second to save its life. There is, you know, decks that are good, that could play Ref Synchron, but any of those like purely pile type decks are mostly just pretty ass. I'm going to try to focus on the decks that are, you know, played a bunch rather than decks that maybe aren't played that much. Next we have Branded, and this is pure Branded because we have Chimera here as well. So pure Branded I think is tier 2. I think the big issue the deck has is that if it gets hand trapped, it basically has nothing. You put a bunch of resources into like this play, and then when the play resolves you go plus 1 billion, but then when it doesn't, you put those resources into the play already. And that's something I notice a lot with Branded. Like you Ash Branded Fusion, that's the typical haha, but even like an Imperm on a Cartesia sometimes can already be way too much. Deck plays like a bunch of bricks in order to benefit from all of those plays, and in doing so it can't really run that much non-engine either, and so it's just an awkward deck. I mean, it's crazy whenever it goes off, it can go Puppet Lock and so forth, but I do not think it's a top tier contender. Chimera is a bit better. I would maybe even put it somewhere in here, especially because it wasn't really hit by the ban list. It can play a lot of non-engine as well, and so while the format is still fresh, people are still trying to figure out what's going to be very good, you can play so much non-engine that even when you're not that sure what you're gonna meet, you're still gonna be probably fine. Next we have Dark World. I think Dark World is terrifying, but it is also like not great, you know, it doesn't really top much for a reason, but it's still terrifying. Like if your opponent goes first, you're in a tournament at a regional or a YCS, and they activate a danger, you're like, oh come on, please be tier, and then they pitch a Dark World, you're like, yep, that's it. You might not be maining Droll, and that's basically it. Now, a little tip though for Dark World. A lot of people do think it's over when, you know, they start playing. Sometimes an Imperm or an Ash on their Dugares can be enough, which is crazy. Or on Saryuja, you know, depending on what play they go for first. Then we have Dragons. Dragons are spooky. Dragons got hit last list, but, you know, they were fine-ish still. And now that everything else got hit a little bit closer to fine-ish, I think Dragons is going to be spooky again. I also really like that this deck has like a really high ceiling, but I do think this deck plays very awkward into the Rescue Ace board, and spoiler alert, I think Rescue Ace is still really solid. Next we have Exo Sister. To me, Exo Sister is just another shifter deck, and that's it. I mean, it's just a shifter deck. That said, shifter is still crazy, and now that tier is gonna go way down, and Unchained is gonna go way down, people might not be that scared of shifter anymore. They might play decks that die harder to shifter because they're like a bunch of people are gonna be cutting shifter, and maybe then Exo Sister gets a little bit better as well. Next we have Flu. I think Flu is just a worse shifter deck because like the end board of Flu is nothing. In my opinion, nothing on the Flu end board does anything. It's just that there's combinations of shifter and Feather Storm nuking you. The deck also bricks a bunch. It's just an awkward deck. Like I don't know what to say. Next we have Punks. Punks are just rogue. I mean, they can put up like crazy end boards, but they can't go second to save their life. They also die very hard to specific hand traps. Like if they go into the big fusion from a Shirakusai and then you Ash that, GG. Sometimes ashing Foxy Toon ends a bunch of their plays. Droll, of course, always nukes them. So Punk is just, you know, it's fine, it's cool, I like the engine, but it's not gonna be a top tier deck. Heroes, I mean, Heroes really is a floodgate deck. Anyone saying otherwise is fucking crazy. Like, what is Heroes ending on? It's ending on Plasma, it's ending on Dark Law, it's ending on the Dark Angel. That's just all floodgates. Next we have Infernoble. Infernoble used to be, you know, right here somewhere, but now I don't know. You know, it got hurt. Now, I'm sure people like Pack and so forth will be cooking. I'm also part of the Infernoble Discord. I've played that deck a little bit the past few weeks, but it's not that great. Next, we have Kashtira. Kashtira is another shifter deck, but at least it's able to play like good non-engine, and it is also able to end on like real cards even when hand trapped. Like whenever you Ash Robina or Ash even a pot into like Flu, there's like a high likelihood that they can't even play. Whereas if you like Ash on Kashtira cards, there's still gonna be that fucking Fenrir, right? Next, we have Lab. Lab is real. Lab is really, really scary. Nothing in Lab got hit while everything around it got hit, so I think this is definitely going to be a tier 1 deck. However, there's one thing to keep in mind, and that is that Lab is extremely targetable. If everyone believes Lab is the best deck, then the sides will be filled with Ashes, Cosmics, and Bells, and Lab will stop being the best deck. So while I think Lab is definitely like really strong and it's gonna be part of tier 1, the fact that people know that means it's very unlikely to be the very best deck. I expect Ashes and Cosmics in people's sides, maybe even Bells depending on how desperate they are. Next we have Vanadium. Vanadium is spooky scary. It also didn't get hit whatsoever. To me, this is gonna be like bottom of tier 1 or top of tier 1.5 because I definitely do think Vanadium is like a stronger deck overall than these two. But Droll is like... Droll hurts. I mean, there's builds that play through it a little bit better, but when this goes second into a board and like you have to then get Drolled on top, it's just over. Marincess is cute, I guess. I mean, it's not a great deck, but it's a typical one-card starter deck that can play a bunch of non-engine, and so you gotta always be somewhat afraid of that. Next, we have Circular. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I'm just sorry. Then we have Mikanko. I think Mikanko definitely got a fair bit worse. Like the version of Mikanko that uses Isolde and the Ken and Gen stuff and Acid Golem locks and all of that. While I would have gladly put it at like at the top of tier 2 earlier, maybe even bottom of tier 1.5. Now with that Isolde hit, I just think like... I mean, they can still go second very well, but that type of deck definitely got hurt. Next, we have Pearly. Pearly got hit a fair bit. I definitely think it should go somewhere here, though. Like, the hit to Sleepy, while it makes the My Friend way worse, like whenever they have to start with Pretty Memory or Happy or basically any of the memories that isn't Sleepy, now your My Friend won't always hit Sleepy, and so you will brick a little more often. That said, it's still a crazy deck, and your My Friend can still call Sleepy Sleepy Delicious, so it's still playable. Pearly is still gonna be really, really good. With that being said, I do think Rescue Ace is still really solid. The Airlifter hit hurts, obviously, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as some of the other decks. You know, other decks got hit way harder. We see the OCG Rescue Ace having 2 Airlifter, which is also a hit, and really, the deck is still like the best deck or second best deck. You could say, oh, but they have Bonfire and Populous and blah, 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 but sure, like, we can just play higher copies of Diabellstar. We can still copy. We will play through a hand trap a little less good, a little less often, sure. We might want to play Durandal now to have more copies of Airlifter that way, sure. But in the end, like, the deck is still great. The deck is still easily a tier 1 contender. The question is, like, are you respecting the fact that people will respect Lab more? Yes, then we put it this way. No, then we put it this way. But they're still tier 1 contenders easily. Next, we have Plants. Plants got hit really hard. I would have to ask Jess or some other Plant Pro, you know, what their thoughts are. For now, I'm gonna put it in I'm sorry, not because I think it's worse than Punk, but because I feel sorry for those hits. So yeah, Circular and Plants, you're in I'm sorry, not because Plants is necessarily worse than Heroes, but because I truly do feel sorry and I need like an actual pro opinion to know where this has to be put. Next, we have the Runic engine, or well, any Runic deck. It's hard to say. I think Runic is still like very, very spooky, but if people are respecting Lab with Cosmics, then Runic is also going to feel that. And like, which Runic variant are you even going to play? Maybe Life Twin Runic is going to be a good pick now. That's possible. If people are playing less Bistchels because Unchained and Tyr are going to fall off a fair bit, then Life Twin Runic might be real. I think the Bistchel Runic deck Joshua played isn't that crazy good, honestly. Like, obviously, it's the Joshua effect. Everyone's going to copy it, so now it's going to top a bit more. But the deck is like fine, you know. But it's Joshua. Now, the Runic engine as a whole, though, definitely wasn't hit and is really, really strong. So I'm going to put, you know, the type of decks that play Runic in tier 1.5. Definitely not a stun type, though, because the stun decks just lost a bunch of floodgates as well. Though I will say it's mostly the weaker floodgates that they lost. Next, we have Salamangrate. Salamangrate, I think, is right here. My friend Max actually won his giant card at YCS Dortmund with Salamangrate. Salamangrate is solid. It's not insane, but it's solid. It definitely feels weaker than some of these top decks, but it's not as weak as before the support. It's just that a lot of good players aren't necessarily on Salamangrate because they have way higher odds with some of these other decks. Unless they are so in love with Salads that they pick it anyway. Then we have Sky Striker. I think Sky Striker is like... cute. This stuff just hasn't aged that well. Those cards are still crazy. Some people are saying, oh, with Upstart, the deck is going to be way better. I honestly don't see how. Yeah, Upstart is like a way to get spells into grave, but if you were that desperate for spells in your grave, you would have played like dog shit Toon Table of Contents, and like you aren't, for obvious reasons, because that's bad. You are not that desperate for those spells, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you are already weak to draw. Now you're gonna make yourself weaker to draw. You're gonna give your opponent a bunch of life, so you take away like your OTK lines, which sometimes can actually be real now. I know it's weird to think, but like linkage plays or even just, you know, any type of those lines, you suddenly have more life. You make yourself weaker in time. I don't know. I think triple Upstart is just not gonna really change much to Striker. Even if you put them in, I don't think the level of your deck is gonna go up by much. Next we have Sprite. Sprite is nuts, but it definitely has felt like the power creep, you know? Like, out of Power of the Elements, this deck was crazy. It did have Sprite Elf and Toad, which was a massive thing, but the end board it puts up right now is still crazy as well. It just feels power crept out, but that said, I think this buff in starter and better going second cards really helps the deck. Also, some of its worst matchups, like Unchained, got way weaker. So, hot take, I think Sprite was helped. It's not gonna be like, you know, tier 1 Rescue Ace type of power, but it's definitely up there. I think people are no longer respecting Sprite, even though it's still pretty real. Next, we have Sword Soul. I think Sword Soul's fine, honestly. Like it still puts up a fine board. It has a lot of room for non-engine. A good pilot can really get like a lot of little juicy plays out of it. It's not up there, you know. Next, we have Tier. Now, if I was making this video a week ago, I did this. Tier best deck, baby, let's go. However, Yugioh Kelbeck does hurt a lot. It hurts. I'm gonna put it right here. I think Tier, a lot of people are calling it dead. I mean, it's not dead. Like, with Horus and other types of mill engines, like, Tier is the type of deck that there's like 7 sub-engines that we have had in line just waiting to be used for when we got deck space, and now we forcibly got deck space, and it's like, all right, now we'll try this out, and now we'll try this out, and now we'll try this out. And so there's like a lot of room for getting this deck to higher places, but that said, Yugioh Kelbeck are really harsh hits. So it's not dead. I'm not going to push it in, I'm sorry. I'm not going to put it in even Rogue. I think it'll still be fine. But I think right now is the time where people are going to stop respecting it as well. Like, is Rescue Ace really going to int into Dweller? Like, Tier is still going to play its Dweller outs. It's still going to play its Droplet and its Nib. But now, you're also making yourself weaker to everything else and making your board way shittier just for your Dweller to get outed. So, like, Rescue Ace is probably now like, Tier is no longer real. So, fuck it, they're cutting Dweller. I think Tier, even for the mirrors, because there's going to be far fewer of those, is gonna start cutting their Dweller. Like, Shifters are probably out, because like, really, what are you hitting with Shifter? Lab cares kinda, Rescue cares kinda, Vanadium cares kinda, Pearly cares kinda. Yeah, these two care a lot. Sprite cares kinda, Runic cares kinda, Exorciser doesn't care, Branded cares kinda. So like, when Shifter is only doing kinda, people tend to not play Shifter in decks where it's not great. Of course, they'll play it in Exo and Flu, but everything else, they're kind of gonna cut it. And so, like, I feel like that hate being diminished keeps Tier from falling off completely. And so for that reason, I'm still putting it in like low tier 2. Next, we have Trap Tricks. I mean, fine, I guess. Next, we have Unchained. Yeah, Unchained got hit hard. I mean, I would put it in I'm sorry because like it hurts, but I'm putting it here because like the deck is not dead. It's just that its biggest issue is how many bricks it needs to run. And now it needs to run more. If it wants to reliably put up Caesar with the whole Sharvara limit and so forth, it's gonna have to play 2 Shyama. That sucks. The deck already had a bricking issue. You were already running the big guy and Shyama and like the Vice King thing and like a bunch of those bricks that all suck ass. Now you're gonna have to play yet another one, and you're gonna play through hand traps, worse, and you're gonna go second, worse. So the deck really got hit, but it's not dead. It's just that, like, I don't know. If I were trying to go to a YCS right now with Unchained, I would kind of reconsider. Next, we have Vanquish Soul. Vanquish Soul wasn't hit, and so it is definitely happy about that. I don't think the deck is that great, but it'll still be fine. You know, it's still gonna be here. Next, we have Horus. I mean, Horus is just an engine, and as an engine, I guess its stonks went up because Yugioh and Kelbeck were banned, and so now this is your only way to mill. Sure, I'll put it next to Runic as like engines that are happy, but it's not really a deck on its own just yet. Now we have Fire King. Now, if this was post Phantom Nightmare, Fire King would be, you know, somewhere high in tier 1. But because we're pre-Phantom Nightmare, I think it's like right about here. I think it's solid. Definitely like able to put up a fine board, play a lot of non-engine, didn't get hit by anything. Cool. But it's also not really up there in terms of power, I feel, just yet compared to some of these other decks. So this is how I feel for this format that's gonna last maybe a month and a half, maybe 2 months from now-ish or so. And then once we get Phantom Nightmare, everything changes. Now, of course, early in January, we're getting Maze of Millennia. That's gonna bring rollback, which is also gonna help lab, and maybe that will create a whole new deck, you know, maybe some type of rank 6 spam deck that then does the rollback plus my Akashi lock or something like that. That's gonna be cringe as fuck, but that's hard to predict because I don't know if it exists yet. So from the decks that we know, I think though that this is gonna look pretty reliable in terms of what we can expect. So I hope you found this interesting. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you still need a beautiful playmat, you can go to zerodamagegaming.com and use a code Solemn for a discount. There's also beautiful deck boxes, and I will see you soon. Ciao.